Welcome back to Friend and Foe Adventure Co., an immaturely mature podcast. Content warnings can be found in the episode description. Today, I don't think we'll have very much in the way of content warnings because I'm going to be chatting with somebody. We're going to do a little interview here that I thought would be fun. And I'll introduce them in just a sec. I'm going to do this big, large setup here, build up that anticipation. Video game music has been iconic for a long time. I can say Tetris or Mario, and you can probably hear the music in your head. And while I wouldn't call that music bad in any way, especially because of technology limitations at the time, the music in the industry has come a long way. To the point that in 2023, they even added a Grammy Award for Best Score, Soundtrack, and Other Interactive Media. Technically, video games were included in the Grammy Award for Best Score Soundtrack for Visual Media, but the only game ever nominated was Journey in 2013. So it's come a long way. I think that all of the Borderlands games have had some absolute bangers in their music, and that continued on into Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, the Borderlands spin-off of Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep. With Tiny Tina bunker mastering a game of bunkers and badasses, I've always had the idea of interviewing folks who've worked on the video games and seeing how we can implement some of their expertise. So I'm very excited to sit down and chat with the composer of Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, and you're now in-house composer for Gearbox Software, Josh Carro. Is that how you say last name? I should have checked that.
Yeah, that's all good. Yeah, Carro or Carro.
Carro? Okay. Yeah, welcome on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
We connected on Twitter, so I saw that you had recently done an interview on, what was the channel now? I forgot.
Sonic Sphere, possibly?
Yeah, I think that was YouTube.
Yes.
I watched that. That was great.
Oh yeah, super nice folks. Kind of funny how something positive came out of Twitter, right?
I know, yeah.
That's my goal, to make the internet, a positive place.
You did it for me. This is like a dream come true right here.
Hey, you're doing it for me as well. So, yeah, it's awesome.
Let's get started. What's your background in music? How'd you get into it?
I started music very young age. I started seriously when I was about 9. That was like practicing 6, 7, 8 hours a day, as much as I could. I fell in love with the drum set when I was a little kid. This is going to be funny, but I saw a video of Buddy Rich. He's a famous drummer, if you don't know who he was, playing a drum solo on the Johnny Carson show in like the very early 80s, like probably one of the, last times he was doing that stuff. And I saw that as a little kid. I must have been like 4 or 5. And I mean, it just blew my mind. And ever since I kind of figured out what it was, like, that's the drum set, and found out what music was. And it was this just way to really express like raw expression and emotion. Ever since then, right about 9, I bugged my parents like as much as I could for a drum set, and I found one in the classifieds back then when you would look in the newspaper for things that were for sale. And I found a drum set, and we went to the guy's house, looked at the drum set, and we bought the drum set. And I started taking lessons, and like I was really, really serious about it. I was practicing all the time. I was in any band I could be in school, and my own bands. I'm really into metal. I was starting metal bands, and that was more later, like 6th grade and things like that. So that's kind of where it started. And then, from there, I just kept, doing music. I studied it in school. I did it in high school. I went to college for music. I did a master's. And throughout then, I was finding ways to work in music. And that's kind of the short story of it.
Wow. That's really cool and exciting. I gotta take a little tangent here. Tangents, sure. Welcome here, by the way.
Tangents. Yeah.
Feel free to, go off topic, do whatever you need to. Metal-wise, I don't listen to a lot of metal anymore, but do you have favorite metal musicians?
Sure. Probably the musicians that I'm in bands with.
Yeah.
But those folks aside, when I was growing up, I was listening to a lot of different types of music. I was very much into metal, but I was also really into jazz, and I was also really into contemporary classical music. So I was listening to like John Cage and Pierre Boulez, all the way from that to Slayer and Pantera. So I could say that metal bands like, Slayer and Pantera will always have my heart there. So if anybody ever asks me, what's your favorite metal band? I can't really say because there's just too much amazing art out there in the metal field, But if I had to say one, I'd be like, well, it was when I first learned of the classics or whatnot.
Yeah, totally. I don't know if you know anyone over at Nerdvana Games, but Ian Moss over there, he's the lead designer there.
Oh, yeah.
He's very into metal. So if you guys have met or ever meet, then there's your talking point.
I think we actually did meet at one point. When I used to actually live very close to Nerdvana, and I would go there once in a while, and I think I did meet him. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, he's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Cool. What about your background in video games?
Yeah, that's another interesting thing. I had loved video games ever since I was a little kid. I mean, okay, I'm going to date myself. I'm 41 years old, all right? So I was around when the first Nintendo came out, okay? That was like the other side of that was the Sega Master System. That was like Sega's version, right? And so my parents, as a gift, got me that when I was a little kid. And that's when I was starting to really kind of get into video games. So I've been playing video games a long time, but I would never really call myself an avid gamer. I'm interested in the artistic side and creativity of what video games can do, right? So I was falling into these games that I had no idea what I was getting myself into, realizing how awesome they were going to be. Like one I can say in this example, this would be for PlayStation 1 though, was Silent Hill 1. And so I'm sorry, I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but my background really is falling in love with video games because of the narrative that they can create and the interesting emotions that they can make you feel. Games such as Silent Hill or Metal Gear or, Shinobi from a long time ago. Alex Kidd in Miracle World. I had that for the Sega Master System. And also, I'll add one more thing, is the challenge that these things sort of brought, because there's this thing in video games now where I think video games compared to older times are a lot easier now than they used to be as far as like difficulty level. Like when I was playing Alex Kidd Miracle World, for instance, there was no difficulty level, I don't think. I think there might have been 2 options, but maybe not. Now we have all different kinds, right? Because we're making it accessible to a lot of different folks, and it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Back in those days, I was like determined to beat Sonic the Hedgehog, like no matter how hard it was, and that was before you could save your game too.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if that's the answer for my background in video games, but I've always loved video games the same way that I love music and the way that I love art and such.
That's a perfect answer. I mean, that's your answer, right? So it's the perfect one. Do you have any experience with like board games or tabletop RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons?
Actually, I don't. That's kind of funny because I think that being into that sort of thing also requires you to be friends with other people who are into those sorts of things. And I don't have that many friends. so yeah, I never really got into that sort of thing because I think a lot of my time was being spent in the practice room. And as you know, like those games are very time consuming, right? To learn them and to like play them properly. And like, then you really fall in love with them and then you're playing them a lot, So I think that's probably the reason that I didn't get so much into that was because I was just doing other things,
Hey, I get it. Not a lot of people call you Michael, but but the few that do are lucky.
My name is Josh, but my friends call me Michael, and you're always welcome to call me Michael.
Sweet. Yes, we're friend.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I totally get that. It's kind of funny. I started playing guitar before my friends started playing guitar, but I always had this like a lot of stuff going on. I was very social in high school and middle school, and he ended up moving to Columbia. He wasn't necessarily allowed to like go out, and so the next summer and during the summers he'd come and he'd live with us, and all of a sudden he was like busting out these Metallica solos and like
wow.
I was just like, oh my gosh, man, what'd you do?
Coming out of his shell.
I know, exactly. He's like, all I could do was play guitar. So
wow.
But I feel like a lot of my friends who like got really, really good at music, they kind of like they focused in on that, and that was their priority. So
Sure. I mean, I think that music was my board game, because back then, like, I still have some energy in me, but back then when I really had energy in me, I didn't feel like stopping when I was practicing. People had to tell me like, okay, that's enough. Like you need to stop now.
oh yeah,
That's all I wanted to do. Like that's all I wanted to do,
yeah,
which is a good and a bad thing. But fortunately, it was something that was constructive so that later on, when I did need to focus on other things, learning other things, such as math and, science and just things about the world, and being able to understand how the world works, I was able to have some sort of framework, from learning something that was good for my mind.
yeah, absolutely. I used to play in bands and write music, and there were times where I definitely called out of work because I was like, I'm in the zone.
Yeah.
I'm in the zone. I'm making music. Did you do that same kind of thing?
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. I was in marching band. I was in all that stuff. There was even times where I couldn't go to like band practice at school because I had another music thing going on. And I was like, well, I can't go to this show because I have a show that I already said I was going to do, or a thing that I was going to do. I would say maybe that's the professional side. The unprofessional side is I did do a lot of that being social. So I would not hang out a lot. I would go do my own thing a lot. I missed out on a lot of, Halloween parties or like partying with the kids after school and things like that, which probably was a good thing because it was something positive. Not that that sort of thing isn't positive, but I was probably doing things that were better for myself.
In the long run, I mean, right? Here you are, you're making it as a musician, I would say. You make a living making music, right?
That's right. Yeah.
It's that sacrifice. But
Yeah.
that's the thing though, does it even feel like a sacrifice to you because it's what you love?
Sure. That's a really great deep question because yes, I am doing a lot of the things I love, but I do know where I sacrificed certain things, whether it is social or family, deciding a certain lifestyle type of things because I feel that this path is important for me and I have to do this, and if I'm going to do this, I kind of have to sacrifice that. So yeah, I definitely feel it sometimes, but ultimately I think that if I didn't sacrifice it, I would be sitting on the other side of the fence wondering, gee, like what would I be doing if I, just did what I wanted or thought I should do.
Yeah, and it's interesting.
Yeah.
Got me thinking about, like I made those same kind of decisions when like 11 years ago I started recording an album.
Oh, cool.
And then I was like, I got engaged during that time and I was like, do I really want to go tour? Do I want to go like do all of this stuff, or do I want to be able to like come home at night? And
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's definitely a thing. Some folks really know how to balance that. I just even haven't even had the time for that sort of thing to happen to me, really. So maybe that's a heavy part of my sacrifice. But I wouldn't, and like this is a little bit of a tangent, but I wouldn't necessarily tell people that they need to make certain sacrifices to do the things that they want. I think that it's very, very individual, if that makes sense.
absolutely.
My sacrifices do not need to be the sacrifices that you need to make to do, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I feel like in a lot of discussions of like, how did you get where you are? Or, I mean, like looking at Randy, right? Pitchford,
Sure.
he talks about like being a magician first and then that leading into like entertainment. And then it's like from being a magician to entertaining with video games and now movies, right? Like
Yeah,
there's that whole progression. It's just like you don't know exactly where your path is going to lead you and what sacrifices
totally.
you're making to get there. So,
I mean, when I first started playing drum set, I thought that reading music was stupid. And now here I am, like writing music, and like actual notation and things like,
yeah.
So it's like those things, wherever that path leads you, it leads you to wherever you're going. I never thought I would be working in video games because my career, other than video games, is like there's a lot going on in the chamber music world, in the electronic music world, in the bands that I play in, and the the albums that I'm recording, the lectures that I do at universities, but when I first started working at Gearbox, it all kind of clicked, and I was like, wow, this makes sense, because all this style of composition that I do, which I like to call modular, not necessarily modular synthesizer, but modular in a sense of a system that has many different things in it that can all kind of work in different ways, right?
Yeah.
And that is my style with my chamber music and my music just in general. But then when I stepped into this position and realized, like, holy cow, this is why it's like second nature to me, because I'm used to thinking of modular systems, because video games are modular, right? I mean, even in a linear, platformer, right? Yeah, you're going to go in a certain direction, but maybe you decide to stand in this spot for 10 hours, right? That is a form of modularity. So you need to be able to say, well, what are we going to do with the music if this person stands here for 10 hours?
Yeah.
That's an extreme example, but that's kind of, a good way to put it, I think.
Oh, yeah. I think that same thing with certain, like, even just your intro music, the opening menu, how many people open up a game and then it's just there. And
Yeah.
you don't start it and you hear that music going and eventually it drives you crazy, or it blends to or it you get it oh yeah, I love that. Oh, it's so
Yeah.
nice background. I have questions pertaining to that later. And
Sure. I have answers, I think.
yeah, I'm so excited you explained that module. Jumping back to chamber though, real quick, is that so on your website, I listened to, a good amount of music on there, which I thought was really, really cool. Is that what chamber is, where it's there was static and I thought of it as experimental, but
yeah, that's probably a better way to put it, is experimental music. The reason I think that I say chamber music is because I'm relating it to ensembles that are of different instrumentation every time.
Oh, okay.
Whether it's a huge orchestra or whether it's hey, dude, do you want to write a piece for my ensemble? Sure. What's your instrumentation? Piccolo, harmonica, saxophone, and bass drum. I'd be like, okay, that's a weird instrumentation, but that is a chamber instrumentation, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So that's kind of how that. I guess that's the way I say it. But experimental music, yeah, my music is 100% from the experimental music tradition, if you will. It's not a tradition, but it's becoming one now because it's so old.
Oh, that's weird to think, huh?
Hey, they're teaching jazz in universities now. They never used to teach, and that's even old of me to say. They're teaching rock music in universities now.
Yeah.
20 years ago, 25 years ago, if you went to a music school and said, I really want to learn how to play rock music, they would say, you don't learn rock music in a music school, you learn traditional Western classical music.
My wife and I were talking about that kind of the other day, where Robert Smith, right? The Cure.
Yeah.
He was a professor at Juilliard, I think. Is that, yeah. And it was just she's like, what? Getting to learn music?
That's cool. I mean, that's awesome. I mean,
so bad.
That's the other, this is maybe a tangent, but.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Learning music in a school is more than just learning technical abilities, like how to use chords and, how to play some basic things on piano or just the basic technique of your instrument, but learning how to be creative. And what better person to learn how to be creative from than someone who, like you just mentioned, built a career out of being creative. Creativity is individual too. So no one can teach you that. They can only say learn how to be yourself. And that's where you'll find your fountain of creativity,
Yeah, exactly. Do you feel well, I guess what kind of brought you to Gearbox? How'd that happen?
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting story. Let's see. So after I finished my master's at CalArts, that was in about 2013. I lived in LA from then until about 2019, 2020, when the pandemic happened. And I was, living in my studio apartment. I was just music full time, wasn't making very much money. I was barely able to pay the bills, but I was doing so many things. I mean, I had 3 shows every week. I was having 20 music composition premieres every year, which is, to put it in perspective, that's actually kind of a lot. That's brand new pieces that people want you to write for them, and then you go and you write it and they perform it in a hall or whatnot, whatever, So I was documenting all this stuff. I was documenting my process. Of course, when I was having these pieces played, I was either running the electronics or the board. I was taping it. I was making good recordings of it. I was building a body of work, and I was just blasting it online. Little did I know, some of the folks from Gearbox were seeing that, and I actually know someone that worked there. We went to school together, but we never really were keeping in touch or anything. We just knew each other. And I guess he saw some of the stuff I was doing, and he was like, we kind of need someone like this on our team, someone who can play an instrument well, someone who knows how to compose, someone who knows how to compose in different styles, someone who isn't like the mainstream of like that everyone is doing, I don't know if that makes sense, but someone who's different, someone who's going to approach it from a different perspective rather than just let's write a cinematic score. So that was kind of bubbling and going, and I saw them put up a job. I think it was on LinkedIn, maybe, just up for a composer, and I applied to it. Ended up doing some contract work with them. I think it was kind of a tryout. The contract work is to see if we can work well together. And they asked me if I wanted to do it. And I was like, yeah, let's do it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
From what I can tell of Gearbox from years and years of following them is that they are a very we're a family here. Like we need to blend together really well. We need to be able to work together, passionate people in their areas coming together. Sure. And I really admire that. It feels like, from the outside, at least, it feels like that's the setting.
I mean, I think that in general, that's kind of a requirement in gaming or in game dev, because no matter how clean you try to make it, it's usually it gets pretty dirty. It gets pretty not dirty, but chaotic and at times. And it's important for you at the end of the day to be like, okay, we got to keep our cool and be together on this and make this work without getting angry at each other and not doing stuff or whatnot. I think that in general, and I hope, most gaming companies are kind of like that because they have to be,
Yeah.
Because it is a messy process and there's a lot of people working on it. A lot of people in these companies,
That makes perfect sense to me. Going to Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, can we talk about that specifically for a little bit?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, you've got on the soundtrack, there's 35 listed songs on there.
Yeah.
There's probably more little things that aren't on the soundtrack, I imagine, like transitions Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you started kind of crafting the music, do you build an arsenal of instruments to fit the tone of the game, the theme of the game, like specific woodwinds and brass and all this?
Yeah, you're the first person that's ever asked me that question the way that I usually answer it. Usually, because people always say well, do you start writing themes or what do you do? And my answer is I always, other than doing the style guides and research and development of other games or what I want to do with it, I start building instrumentations of instruments that I hear in my head when I'm thinking about this game. And that's exactly what I did. I did that for all the maps individually. So pretty much every map has its own instrumentation. All the bosses have their own instrumentation. All of the cinematics have their own instrumentation. I mean, most of the cinematics are orchestral. But yeah, that's where I approach it, Yeah, actually, for Tiny Tina, I was I pictured her in the field playing a broken viola or a violin, like a fiddle. And so I started I found one and I started trying to record ideas on it. And I am no violist, okay, but I'm good enough to play one or two notes and then sample,
Yeah.
But that's how I started building somewhat of a not framework, but identity for that. You'll hear, and even if you listen to the music in the overworld, where you're just, the overworld part where you're just that ambient track, that's me playing this viola, that melody. Da 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 da.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I tried to include this in the most important parts of the narrative where I felt like, Tina was having some sort of emotional, maybe not response, but importance in the game. Like if you listen carefully to soundtrack, like you'll hear this in those moments. Like you'll hear it in the imagine your character. That's the music I wrote for the when you're creating your character. So you'll hear this in there, But yeah, sorry if that answers your question.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's really cool. I was making sure I grabbed a screenshot of it so I could share it on social media.
Oh, cool. Yeah. You want me to hold it up again?
Yeah, go ahead, actually. No, let's do it. Let's do a little pose.
There it is.
That's great. Yeah.
I might add, what was cool about it was that if you imagine Tina playing a viola or violin or fiddle in the field, she's not going to be playing a Stradivarius. She's not going to be playing a $2 million,
Yeah.
So it made it a little bit easier. I was like, I could find an instrument like that anywhere, So even though it's a cheap kind of broken instrument, it's perfect for it because it fits her character, Like I imagine her finding it in a treasure chest. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. I could see that. And it has that personality, right? That is an interesting thought, too, of, playing Skyrim or something. And you totally get like a lute or something. It's like, well, how would that actually sound? Like you just found this instrument in a chest somewhere.
Totally. And like, if you play games now, like with that perspective that you and I just talked about, like I guarantee no matter what game you play, when you think of it that way, you'll start seeing consistencies in that. You'll be like, oh my gosh, that's why I'm hearing a lute, or that's why I'm hearing,
Oh, yeah.
It kind of brings an extra dimension to video games, is understanding what the artists were intending that you may not notice unless we just talked about it, right?
Yeah.
So,
do you and this side tangent thing, but just got me thinking because Matt Cox did some of the music for 3. He had some music in there
for Borderlands 3.
Yeah. Have you ever jammed with him?
I haven't. I came on after BL3 was out already.
Yeah.
I did have a lot of chats with Matt because I think he was the creative director for Wonderlands.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we had a lot of chats. He was in a lot of those syncs and a lot of those meetings, and yeah.
Nice.
Good guy. Yeah.
That's cool. I've never met him. He's like one of the earlier people from Gearbox I was following. So
Sure.
Well, so I don't know exactly how to phrase this, but because I don't do video game music, but in my head, this is how it would make sense. But you have kind of like ambiance music and then more like cutscene music, or which like would be more cinematic, or
sure.
Does it break down into something further than that? Is that an oversimplification?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Like there's basically in-game music, or like music that is modular and not linear. And that would be like the ambient music that you hear when nothing is happening, the combat music, or maybe the music that happens after you open a chest or beat a boss. Those are all kind of things that have to happen at any given time, right? They can't just be linear.
Yeah.
So there's really a whole music system just for that, of all those different states you can be in, right? Like, and even like combat, there isn't just one state of combat, right? Like there's maybe one that's more intense, or one that's even just ballistic, and then one that's just a little bit, there's all different kinds. You could even think of Red Dead. When you're walking through that game, as soon as you start exploring, the music changes a little bit, becomes a little more like, oh, I'm doing something, or I'm walking to this quest, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's a systematic part of music, and then there are the cinematics where they're just linear, right? Yeah. So I would say that it's kind of like that. Yeah.
So I think this would go for either one, but focusing on like kind of cut scenes, right? Like,
yeah.
I feel like, should we do spoilers or keep it vague enough that maybe if people haven't played the game?
It's up to you. I think by now, almost everyone is like, it's been out how long now? 2 years, maybe?
Yeah. That's kind of what I was thinking. I was like,
it won't bother me. It's up to you.
Okay. Yeah. We'll say spoiler here. It happens fairly early in the game too, but like in Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, you go back to Bright Hoof. You're being, was it like knighted, I think?
Yeah.
And then the Dragon Lord shows up and beheads.
Yeah.
So when you're doing something for that, because the music in that so good. I even rewatched it again just before like a couple days ago when I was prepping for this, because I was like, I want to hear, like, really focus in on the music, and it totally shifts. So like, do they show you the cut scene and then you do it to it like in television and movies like they would do sometimes? Or
Yeah, generally, like, we could just call those cinematics, like the cut scenes are like cinematics. Yeah, they generally have, like, that's basically done like traditional film. They write, a plot or a script for it, and then they come up with some scenes, and then they come up, because there's animation involved, there has to be eventually a time lock, because, as you know, like, you can't refilm stuff if it's not right. You also, like, to go back and reanimate stuff is like, it's very work intensive. So the closer you can get the cuts and the shots correct, like, the better, right? So once I have something that is time locked, meaning these scenes aren't going to change. Like, some things in the animation may change, but the way the scenes change, like shift from here to here, or like the time that the head gets, sliced off, those things will never change. So you can compose a cinematic score to this and it'll still fit, right? Because there's not a lot of time. And there's also how many cinematics. I mean, I think for that game, there was like 20 or 30,
Yeah.
So
yeah, Borderlands generally keeps it pretty, like, you stay in character and they don't take you out of that
for sure.
often.
Yeah. So that's how that's approached. If you wanted to go deeper, usually when I get something like that, once I know it's time locked, I go through and I do what's called a spotting. Anyone that composes for film knows this. Is, you put it into your DAW and you watch it, and every time you think something needs to happen, you put a marker in there. Maybe you don't know what it is yet. Maybe you just have a feeling and you just put a marker in while you're watching it. Then you go back and you realize, like, oh yeah, this is where the mood changes, or this is where a big sound design element happens. I might need to get out of the way. You start thinking technically, and then you build like a creative thing underneath of it.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
And that's kind of how I approach it.
It's one of those things, I think, as a viewer or a player, you don't necessarily always notice them, but you would notice if they were off. Or I've definitely played games where I've had to go in and turn the music down in the settings. Yeah. Thankfully, that's like a setting that people can do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because it's just like, wow, that music right now is like overpowering the dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Super important. And that's like you just said, like, that's why, there are things that have to be in line before some of these processes can be done, like composing the music, because the hierarchy changes from time to time, meaning maybe the music is more important at this moment, or maybe the VO is, but if there is voice happening, that needs to be heard, like, you can't overpower it. So there are hierarchies that, like, change throughout that. And it's important to know when that's happening. That's why you need to have the VO in there. Like, I will always say, I can't compose it until there's VO. I don't even really care too much if there's no sound design, because I can imagine what's going to be happening. Like, oh, he just did a bunch of guns, or there was this big rise thing. I can imagine that. But VO is very delicate. You don't know what the tone is going to be. You don't know, so yeah.
Yeah, there's like soft spoken, there's yelling, there's all these types of things that I could see that. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a pretty delicate process, but once you have that pipeline in cement, it's pretty fast. And it's fun too. Like, it's a nice little break to compose to cinematics, because it's linear, so it's not the same thing as you're doing it for the in-game. So you don't have to worry about as much of the same problems as you were worrying out before. It's kind of a nice little break,
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
There's so much diverse music too. So like going into the ambient music, when you're doing that, do they give you like a concept art, or is it just descriptions? Like, at what point do they kind of bring you in and say, like, well, here, let's animate the overworld, right? This is kind of the look of it, or feel. I don't know.
I think that probably changes from studio to studio, because usually the music is outsourced. And when I say outsourced, I mean it's created by someone that isn't inside of the company. So they're brought in, I would say, much later to the process. So they haven't actually been there from the beginning and grown with, the project and seen everything change. And like, we were doing this, but now we're going to do this. And like, being an in-house composer, I get to be there from the beginning. And, in the beginning, as an audio team, we start writing style guides. And style guides are like, okay, what is this game? And so, yeah, we look at the concept art. We read the script. We think about, the characters and where they come from and how we want to represent that with audio. And it has a very organic form at the end because you kind of grew with it like a plant rather than just like, okay, we baked this cake. Now put some frosting on top. I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I'm just saying that there's a difference there.
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. I mean, I think that's kind of a nice thing about having an in-house team, right? Is
for sure
your investment, I think, is, and not that somebody who's contracted out isn't invested in performing to their best, but
of course. But they only have, so much time that they can really invest emotionally into the project, because they have a short deadline, maybe not short, but they have more of a deadline than I do, which is a gift and a curse at the same time, because deadlines are really good.
Yes. Yeah, definitely know that. That kind of brings up a little tangent there, is that how close to like, the game going gold or whatever, how close to that deadline are you working on music for the game? Or you finished a bit before that?
Yeah, I mean, the goal is, for myself, is usually to be like, music is done, it's in the game, it's polished, everything is shippable. Everything is perfect. There's no bugs, there's nothing that can go wrong. Within I don't know the exact time, but within a healthy window before things go gold. So I don't know how to answer the question other than I try to have it finished and done. And then we have a good amount of time to see what random things are going to happen or going to go wrong or what we might need to fix or change.
Has there been any weird instances where something didn't work, or there was like a glitch in the music that, I don't know, is deleted audio instead of a deleted scene? Or
like, I think it comes down to a taste thing. Like, obviously in audio we have a huge responsibility to mix the game really well, because it's not like mixing a linear album where what's going to happen every single time you listen to that 3-minute Pantera track. Like, what's going to happen, like, so you can mix appropriately. But in a game, that's a modular mixing system now. So things are like changing in real time. The only thing would be like, we have to take those drums out at that spot because it just gets in the way. So maybe things like that, but that's like real fine tuning. Like, does this really need to be there? And if it doesn't, is it adding or is it taking away, type of stuff. It's really like, like polishing the sculpture after it's completely done with like the finest sandpaper, that doesn't really take any of the rock away. It's just like, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I do the same thing because I'll just use loops on our podcast, but like, yeah, I'll occasionally, like, if I have something like that, or even like Kyle, he's broken down his music when he sends it to me to be like guitar parts, drum, lead guitar, like slide guitar, all this stuff. And so then I can really, it's modular, right? Like I can be like,
take things out if you don't like it. Like, he just delivers you stems.
Yeah, exactly. So that makes a lot of sense, because sometimes just with whatever's happening, it's like, oh, like as much as I love that and that sounds amazing, I have to like lower that volume or drop it out completely.
Yeah.
Have there been songs that either you or somebody else, bosses or another team, you've put the music to the scene or, in the game, and then it's just like, oh shoot, that doesn't really work with what we're going for here?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's always like rounds of feedback that are going on between, the audio director and the music director, because if I was just to make the music and then throw it in there and then call it done, like, it doesn't work like that. Like, we're collaborating together, and when they don't think something works, we have a conversation about it, and maybe it does work or it doesn't, and we figure that out together, because we're sitting here trying to talk about, intuitions, that we're feeling like, I just don't know if that works, and it's like, well, why not? And because A, B, C, D, E, and you discuss it. And that's kind of how you work as a team when you're working on something large like this, because that's just the way it is. So there's definitely like a feedback process and iteration process, of let's change this, or, I'm not sold on that, or I just don't think we need music for this anymore because, this is only 5 second long cinematic. Like, we don't actually need music for it. Let's just not have it.
Okay. Yeah, like a character introduction where they do like the title card thing and
All
it's
kinds of stuff, It can be anything. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I did notice while going through the track list and everything, and it's so interesting to me because sometimes you don't realize how short certain songs are. Like the Banshee music is
Yeah.
like a minute and a half. I
Yeah.
think it was something like that. It was under 2 minutes, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And that boss fight usually takes, well, I mean,
Wow.
more than that, right? And then even like certain characters, I know, oh shoot, I should have written that down. But, a lot of the character specific music is like a minute to 2 minutes long. I guess, is there a specific reason for that? Is it because those moments, they're more key, like geared towards the character and those moments?
Yeah. Like the difference between the in-game music and the soundtrack is that the soundtrack is almost like a shortened representation of like the music that is happening in the game, but in the game there's many variations that can happen. Like, so when you play that boss, I wouldn't say it's looping, but it's creating its own variations out of the different stems that are in there. So there might be a time where it comes back to the beginning and plays, but you're only hearing like the bass and guitar, or maybe you're just hearing drums this time through, or like, so there's many variations that can happen. So if I was to represent that in the soundtrack, like, that track would be really long. And then to put one more thing, as I was, putting the soundtrack together of how I wanted it to be represented, I was also having to really think very carefully about the time of the tracks, because I wanted it to fit on a vinyl, and then I wanted to do like, a digital version and, all that stuff. So that boss was, I would say, lower in priority than things like the Dragon Lord,
Oh, absolutely.
So those ones are a little bit longer, because I felt like, okay, I can do a little bit more with this one.
That's a good point. Because I was thinking about it, and it's like, listening to this, just this Banshee one specifically, just because
Sure.
it does start off kind of a bit more chill.
Yeah.
Because that's probably where you're like, sliding down the hill. The Banshee's like popping up. There's that whole like little introduction thing. And then it does get more intense. And I was like, I don't remember it like looping back to being calm, like.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you have to focus on, I mean, it's kind of that whole like loopability thing, which I know it's not, that just feels like the best way to kind of say that, I guess. But like when you're, walking around like in the overworld or in any scene and you're just like exploring, it never feels like, oh gosh, this music, I've heard this part of the music before. Yeah, like it's like, oh, there's the restart. Now I know this part. Like how much focus, how much time goes into like creating that?
Yeah, I would say that is very much in my thought process when I'm composing the pieces, because I very much, I think, is this piece going to stand on its own if I'm just hearing the drums? Like, okay. And then I'll listen to that. And like, what if I just have like the strings playing with voice? I know there's no voice in it, but, and I see how that works. And they're like, okay. And like, what happens if I, put 3 tracks together, or just like some silence, So that's how I build the layers, is to almost be different pieces in their own. Maybe all of them work together, but if you just select 2 of them out of the whole thing, it'll work, And that's just one section, right? So imagine if you design 9 sections of music like that, now you have this piece of music that's generating its own variations, because I'm putting these stems in a random container in WYs, and I'm setting up rules for how it so-called repeats or chooses different instruments. And you can also set up rules for, I want it to choose the drums when we get into big battle, like more than I want it to choose this instrument, like
Oh, okay.
you can start thinking of things like that. But for instance, like if you listen to the main theme, like the opening music, or even like the character selection music, you could probably listen to that for like many hours before it even like plays the same thing again. Because I have those going through those sorts of processes, right?
Yeah.
Its own variations. It does that in every map. All the map music is like that. The main intro is like that too. Once it gets to the chill part after the big stuff, and then it comes down, and then it's kind of playing. That's creating its own variations too.
That is really interesting. Do you have to avoid key changes and things like that for that type of music?
That's another, like, one of the many things that I think about when I'm composing is the keys of what's going on. An example could be, all right, this piece is in C. If I write it in C the entire time and it never ever changes, it can kind of get boring, or it can kind of just be same, we like to call it. But okay, well, let's introduce a new key. Let's introduce G. Okay, C and G. If you throw those two keys in a random container and mix them, they will always work, because C and G pretty much always work, right? Now, what if I throw something in a new key? How about F sharp major? Okay, let's see how that works, And if now I have F sharp major, G major, C major, is it going to work from going to C to F sharp? Is it going to work from going to C to G? Is it going to go to work from G to F sharp? Is it going to work from F sharp to G? You know what I mean? Like thinking of all these combinations.
Yeah.
Which is the nature of modular art or music, right?
Yeah.
You're thinking of all the different possibilities, right? And if you really wanted to get grossly technical on it, you can figure out all the combinations by, let's say there's 3 notes. So you would be 3 factorial. So it'd be 3 times 2 times 1. That's how many combinations there are with those 3 elements without, before it repeats again, right?
Wow.
So imagine when you have 5 keys or 6 keys or 7 keys, like, it gets pretty insane. So that's why you kind of approach these things very strategically, if you can, but it also comes from experience too. So, that that OST is not perfect by any means. Like, there's a lot of things in that game when I'm just like, probably shouldn't have done that. But that's the beauty of it. Like, we're not trying to make something perfect. I'm trying to, and even in my description of the soundtrack, is my goal was to try to show people music that they didn't know they liked. Because that's for me, when I was growing up, listening to things that I didn't like and thinking I didn't like them, and then listening to them over and over and actually realizing, like, no, I actually love this. This is amazing. Or falling in love with something by listening to it again. You wouldn't believe how many things, music wise, you just didn't realize were beautiful because you just didn't listen to it enough.
Yeah. It's interesting for me. I've realized that a lot of times if I get a new album and I listen to it and I love it right off the bat, I actually usually don't listen to it as long as if I'm like, oh, I don't think I like this very much. But I'm like, oh, I'll give it a couple more listens. And then all of a sudden I'm like, no, okay, I actually really appreciate this and that and this. And like, it grows on me like a fungus. And I'm just like, I can't get rid of this anymore.
And that's that's kind of similar to, like, this is maybe a tangent, but it's kind of similar to, gastronomy is like, how many foods, like when you were a kid, did you not like? And then when you kind of like tasted it a few more times, you realize, like, oh no, I'm expanding my palate. Like, I actually do like this with this and this with that,
A friend just this weekend was telling me that our taste buds every 7 years, like we have completely different taste buds at that point, right? Like it's shed enough and evolved enough. So like I hated tomatoes growing up, and now I love tomatoes. Well, I don't love tomatoes. I like tomatoes just fine, but like it's one of those weird things. But I almost see that same thing of like probably things that I've eaten collectively throughout the years have been like, well, this has similarities to tomatoes, and then it's like build that in. And I think the same thing probably with music, where like some of the first stuff I remember listening to was like John Williams, right? Like with Star Wars. And it's just like
Yeah.
loving that type of stuff, right? And then like that going into video games and hearing all of that, like, because there's a lot of like orchestral type stuff in there. And like, and then all of a sudden realizing like, oh, you know what? Like, I love this. I think this is amazing, you know? And
Yeah, totally. I mean, and that's also kind of a risk that, like, not just me, I take this risk a lot, but I learned this from, going to school and whatnot, but, listening to music that I didn't like and I hated, but then kind of forcing myself to look at like what the music is about and try to understand it. And then realizing like, holy cow, like I just opened my mind to this thing that I didn't like. And I learned about it, what it was, where it came from. And I've like fallen in love with it. And I actually like it. It's not that I'm talking myself into liking it. It's like finding something new. And what cooler feeling to find something new that you've never seen before, like that's really special. And we also kind of live in a world now where, the gaming community, they have certain expectations of you need to perform on this and this and this and this, or it's not good, and I understand that, of course, at a certain level, like that has to be there. But as an audience member myself, like I feel like I owe it to myself to like really give something a chance. And if I don't like it at the end, it's okay. Like I don't like it, but it's, I think to really give something a chance isn't just needle dropping and being like, this is cool. This is crap. This is crap. Whatever. This piece sucks.
Yeah.
I'm also a person that kind of like has been doing this for so long that there isn't really a type of music that I don't like now, because I hear it all like just notes in the harmonic spectrum, and it's just differentiated by the aesthetic. And so to me, it's just a different, country music is just a combination of pitches, than metal or avant-garde music.
Yeah.
It's all sound, and I don't think everyone can be like that or should be like that, but
as a musician, it's definitely helpful to be open to everything.
For sure. And especially when you have to, create scores that are of versatile, aesthetics and styles, like you can't really be too, I don't know if it's the right word, but bias against something, that you don't like. Like I see it as a challenge. Like if someone came to me and said, Josh, I really want you to write a country album, I would be like, that's an interesting challenge. But these chamber music pieces are like that. They are a challenge because someone says, hey, can you write a piece for solo harmonica? That's an interesting challenge. Like, what can I do with that? And then, you start learning about the harmonica, and I don't need to get too deep into it. But
no, that's interesting.
That's kind of what I think about it.
That's really cool. And that kind of made me think just of like little pieces fitting together, but with like in-game stuff, like you've got guns going, you've got people talking. Do you have to kind of I put things in a certain key to not conflict with that sometimes? Do you ever find that happening?
You should be a game composer, because you're you're saying all the things, you're asking me all the questions of all the things that I think about and that are important,
Oh, nice.
I absolutely do that, and it's not just me. Like you see this in many games. Like, I don't know if you've ever played, this is a totally different game. This isn't like a Borderlands game, but if you've ever played Little Nightmares 1 or 2.
Love it. Yeah. So beautiful.
That is a textbook of what you just said. I mean, they are literally writing like the music in the key of the Foley, of the sound design that's happening in the game, right? And it ties it all together. And they use that like a tool. Like maybe we don't want to tie it together. Maybe we want it to clash. And so we're going to write this key a half step down or whatever it may be, against the Foley. So that we create that. And it's kind of unconscious. Like you as a player, you do think like, or feel, oh, this is kind of uncomfortable, but you're not thinking, oh, they tuned the music quarter tone down from the wind. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, which is exactly what they're doing, in games like Red Dead.
That's really interesting. And now I'm thinking, there was a specific moment in our podcast where I was putting some music, and it was I had wind going in there. And I remember putting some music to it and I was like, this feels off. And so I had to change, like, look for some different music that I had or different loops that would fit. But now looking back at it, I'm like, oh no, maybe I should have left it because it was a very like unsettling scene where
Sure.
like maybe it being off key could have like helped push that like tension.
Yeah. I mean,
Shoot.
another great example of a game would be Ghost of Tsushima, where they literally use wind as a musical sound design element in that game. So
Oh, I haven't played that one yet, but
it's
fascinating.
like short story, like you're guided through the quests by where the wind guides you. So
Oh,
how now if someone was to tell you that's what you need to do for this game, like how do you do that? Like, I don't know. Well, how do we know the wind is telling us something? Is it just going to be normal sounding wind, or maybe it needs to be obvious? Maybe we'll make it musical so that people hear like, oh, something's telling me something. The wind is moving that way and it's creating a musical soundscape.
wow.
So, there are definitely, the people that are designing these things are thinking about that very deeply. So yes, sorry, that was a deep answer, but my answer is yes, I do think about those things. I do think about keys, and if they, with like a Borderlands game or Wonderlands game, it's different beast because there is a lot of sound design happening, right? I mean, you're shooting guns constantly, and
Yeah.
so how do you write music that works with that? Like, do you write a music with a bunch of snare drums happening? Like, probably not, because it's either going to get in the way or you're not going to hear it, right? So you start thinking about where those things fall on the spectrum, and it's like, oh, it would actually work if I just had guitar. I don't need anything else, things like that. Like,
I remember reading or hearing something where they were having problems with, like, in Borderlands 3, or maybe it was Wonderlands. Anyway, one of those, maybe both. Who knows? Oh, because in Wonderlands, you can change your character size. So anyway, they have the guns, and it was like they couldn't just have it be one size fits all. So like if Amara is carrying a gun and Flack is carrying a gun, they actually like scaled the weapon size to them. So it's like actually physically different. I don't know if like certain areas would change if they would change the key of the gunshot sound, like that seems like a weird fix, but
yeah. I mean, the thing about the gun system in Wonderlands or just Borderlands in general is that it's a massive modular system. Like,
yeah,
because the guns are modular, right? Like there's so many different, you can have different parts on a different gun, and maybe it's a different gun altogether because of that,
right.
the sound designers, they think in that way. So they're designing a set modular sound design system that represents that. And so in my mind as a composer, the guns are the most, like, they're just the most important thing that I have to keep in mind in the mix when I'm writing the music. Like I'm always thinking about, so I'm very limited because that's a pretty wide spectrum, like of what's going on.
Oh yeah.
And it's not really a battle you can win. You just have to be aware of it and do your best to try to not get in the way.
Yeah. Hey guys, could you make the guns easier for me to work with? I know that this is what the whole game series is known for, but
Sure.
well, and that's probably a huge advantage to having an in-house composer, right? Is that you learning to work with all of that rather than having somebody
Yeah.
either not think about it, worry about it, or have the time to adapt to it.
Yeah. And this is just one example, but these are things that you can't really have solutions for, like in a week or 2 weeks, to explain to another outsourced composer, because like even yourself making the game, you don't really know, because these are really hard problems. Like, they take games to figure out, like
Yeah.
they take, many titles to figure these things out and to refine. And
Yeah. Really cool. I don't know. I'm just excited. I'm excited to hear what's coming up too. Like we won't talk about any of that because
yeah,
nothing's. Does Gearbox have anything announced right now? Shoot.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. But like, it's really exciting to hear how you'll tackle future games, and we know, we can assume they're making more Borderlands games, of course, and so it'll be interesting to hear how you tackle, like, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is very thematically fits this. You couldn't take Tiny Tina's Wonderlands score and put it into Borderlands 3 and have it feel the same.
Yeah, it's always a puzzle. It's a game in itself. People always say like the hardest video game is like being a game developer, because it's like it's a very difficult process. And yeah, the only thing you can hope is that you get better every time, and then you learn from those things that you know, learned from, you know, and you just kind of keep doing that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You just always got to be learning. My general phrase that I use for myself is in everything I try to implement this is that I'm a better person than I was last year, but a worse person than I will be next year. And so I think of that like both in, you know, both my actual like core ethics and being, that I'm always trying to learn new things and evolve and not stay stagnant, but also like learning new skills and,
Of course,
you know, just evolving.
that should be the title of your book.
Yeah. Started off terrible and I'm just a little bit better. uh, no, well, perfect. Is there anything that you would want to talk about in game design, music, or composing, or anything at all that I've maybe missed?
I can't really think of anything in general other than like, I'm excited to, like you were mentioning, you know, there's now open spots for, you know, video game scores to be, you know, like winning Grammys and things like that. But to me it's not really the like winning Grammy part. It's just that it's like going to be more accessible to more people, you know, and it's like what I was talking about earlier. Like they used to not teach jazz in universities, and now they do. And they used to not teach rock, and now they do. And now they teach popular music. They used to not teach film music. I mean, they have straight up film music, you know, programs at major universities. I know for some time now, but
Yeah.
you know, they didn't really have that when I was going to school. And before that, they definitely didn't have it because people didn't consider film composers real composers because of, you know, intellectual vanity. So
Yeah, that is really interesting. And I think I wonder about the same sort of thing of where do you feel like video game composers were that way for a while?
you know, I don't know. I don't know really know the answer to that question. I may be different, but I know what it's like to be a composer working on contracts, meaning that I'm working on many different things. And so I always see the challenge in it. You know, anyone that thinks like, oh, this pop music is crap, it's like, well, maybe you don't like the song, but if you knew what it was to actually produce something like that, or to mix and master a track like that, to make it actually sound like that out of your speakers, like try to do that and then tell me that that's stupid, you know? So that's kind of a general example. But if you apply that to all the different things, you know, like being a film composer is not easy. Being an avant-garde composer is not easy. Like, you know, none of it is easy. So what I'm trying to say is I always saw it as not easy because I was having to do it, you know.
Yeah.
You know, but I guess the reason I bring that up is because maybe, you know, back then a lot of academic composers in universities weren't scoring film, so they didn't know the process. So people used to make fun of those composers, film composers, for so-called not writing their own music. But you know, the thing is that they're writing their music and then having it orchestrated by, you know, their mentee, because they're teaching this person how to be a film composer. But also, you know, like Hans Zimmer can't orchestrate 20 films, like, or however many films he's working on. Like,
Yeah.
it's not possible, you know? So, like, it's just, I think, understanding about what's going on, you know? So there's more of an understanding now than there used to be because, you know, things are becoming more open and people are getting opportunities to do things. And also, you know, you can't really just decide, like, there isn't one way to make money as being a composer now. It's either like, oh, I'm going to teach at a university, or I'm going to be a film composer, like, or write music for commercial. You know, I don't know. Like, but now there's like so many different things you can do, right? So,
Yeah. That is really fascinating. That would kind of got me thinking about like in high school, Kyle and I have been friends since middle school. He replaced me in our band, actually, in my band that I started on purpose. Like I was ready to step out.
oh, that's cool.
So
Okay.
yeah, so he replaced me and made it way better than I could have ever made it. But like years and years later, he and I started talking about video games, and I was like, dude, we hung out, we went to like parties together, we were really good friends in high school, and I literally never knew you were into video games in high school.
Wow.
And we were like, yeah, we never really talked about it because at that time it was kind of like,
you're like nerdy if you're doing it.
Yeah, exactly. There's like a little bit of a stigma there, and now it's so much more mainstream. It's way cooler. Video games are now like seen as art. They're they've always been art.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so that's like, but just it being more like socially acceptable, I think, draws in bigger names too to be like, well, if people are treating it with more respect, then we got to treat it with more respect and put more effort into the music and the sound design and the storytelling. Like,
I mean, I think ultimately what helps, not helps, but what, and I don't want to say makes someone respect something, because respect, like true respect, is something that it's genuine. And that's why I was saying, like, once you've realized what it is to produce a pop song, or what it is to write a piece for solo piano, or whatever, a film, like once you realize, like, yeah, this is an art form. Once you learn, like, okay, yeah, once you see it for yourself, it's not just like, I respect it because people are telling me to. Like, that's just not genuine respect,
yeah, that's very true.
So I think people are realizing, that, I don't know, it is an art form. It's always been an art form.
Yeah, exactly. It's always been an art form, whether people recognize it or not, or look down on it.
And not to go too long, but I mean, video games in my mind are, especially at this point, they are the evolution and the extension of film. Because how long have video games been around about? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So how long have films been around? They've been around a lot longer. We're kind of seeing video games a little bit go through the sort of kind of bad Hollywood thing that Hollywood went through just a couple years ago. Remember when everyone was kind of getting sick of like Marvel films, or like, I'm just giving examples, but
yeah,
you remember when like people were just getting tired of the same old, because it's going through an evolution, and it's getting to a point where it's like, well, how many times are we going to remake Hulk? Or, like how many times are we going to remake remakes, which I think that we can both agree, whether you like the remakes or not, doesn't matter, but it's happening, right? They're remaking remakes.
Yeah.
And so video games are sort of, we're behind film in a way because we're younger, but we're starting to see some of those same things happening. And this is why you're starting to see more success in the indie game world, because they step away from that in a similar way to where indie film right now is doing amazing. I mean, but it's just like finding new music. You got to do your research and be like, well, what directors do I like? Okay. And you start figuring things out. Video games are very much like that,
That is really fascinating. I love that comparison, and it gets my mind moving.
I mean, we have a lot to learn from film, like video games, because it's been around longer, but we're an extension of it, because video games are a film that happens that you're deciding,
Yeah.
It's like, I'm going to go watch, I don't know, Guardians of the Galaxy, but I'm going to decide what happens.
Well, and every time you watch Guardians of the Galaxy, the score is going to be the same every time you watch it. But when you play a video game, how we were talking about that, the stems and the modularity of it, when you play a video game, your score is going to be different. You're shaping that by what you're doing, kind of.
And even like in Skyrim, like the narrative changes. Like the narrative is not linear, and it is an extended evolution of film. Like that's what it is. I mean, that's even why Hideo is literally trying to create films. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Do you have any advice for people that might be interested in pursuing a video game music career?
Yeah, I think that, and this is what I always tell artists of any kind, is that they really have to do their best to find out who they are and try to follow that. That's how you find your voice, because your voice as an artist, I'm just using the word voice as a symbol, but your voice as an artist is the most important thing you have. And if you're trying to just get a job and you think that your voice should sound like Hans Zimmer or John Williams or Danny Elfman, then you're trying to be them, right? You're not trying to be you. Now, trying to be them is also a tool that you need to have in your tool chest. So not trying to be them, but understanding different aesthetics. And like, yeah, I can create a John Williams score. I'm not saying that anyone can do that.
Right.
But I'm just saying, like,
it's like painting. When you learn from the masters, emulate that, but then make it your own.
Yeah, you learn their technique and you learn how to do that stuff because, art these days is kind of like a 50% technical, 50% creative endeavor. And so definitely start, if you're starting, like try to imitate the things that you really love. It doesn't have to be Hans Zimmer. It can be whoever. It can be whatever you really love. And by trying to imitate those things, you learn how they're doing that. And then you sort of make it your own, right? And you can do that with your own ideas too. You start being creative with your own ideas. So that's not really an answer, but I think that the most important thing really is for an artist to know what their voice is and be good at showing what that is,
Yeah.
Because, these big companies can hire really anybody they want if they want a certain sound, right? So how much more special are you because you can make it sound like this composer that 100 other people can do? Like, yeah, that's just a skill. But, only you have your individual sound. Like, nobody can sound like you once you find out who you are,
Yeah.
And that's, to me, that's the most beautiful, like, freeing thing about being an artist is that, like, it's okay to be me. Like, cool, I can figure out what it is that I like. And I don't have to be something because I'm told to,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it kind of goes to like that, if you focus on just making, Hans Zimmer type music, and that's what you're hired out for, but it's not really your style, it's not really who you are, would you rather make money just kind of imitating somebody else, or like make maybe less money, but doing what you actually get joy out of and being able to like express yourself?
Yeah, but at the same time, I don't think it's that polarized to where you either do this or that. I think that,
right,
because I do gigs a lot where people want a certain sound and like, okay, like I'll make that sound.
Yeah.
But I think that what I described before, that path, like throughout that path, like is what will get you into the scene. It will get you gigs that you hate. It'll get you gigs that you love. It'll get you gigs that you learn from. Like it's all about that path. Like if you just follow that path, that's where you'll get yourself into whatever it is you're going to get into. Maybe it's not gaming, maybe you start thinking, I just want to play the drums and I don't want to write music. I don't like music. I think it's stupid, but I ended up becoming, so maybe you think you want to be a video game composer, but you end up being something else.
Yeah.
And being consistent and being disciplined, with your practice, like you're not going to become good at the piano by just practicing for 10 minutes once a week. That's why if you practice things that you love, you don't really have any problem practicing them, right?
Yeah.
It also doesn't mean that, you're going to have to do things you don't feel like doing, but it's important for you to do them. And you learn that through discipline. There have been many times where I didn't want to do something, and then I was just like, you know what, dude, just bite the bullet, just do it. You need to do this. And at the end of that, I was rarely to never, ever regretful that I did it. I was almost always, oh my God, if I didn't sit down and do that, I would have not got this gig, or I would have not, like, I wouldn't have had that show in New York, or I wouldn't have, like whatever it may be. The opportunities are there. And, when your conscience is telling you to do something that you don't feel like doing, it's kind of like the future you seeing like, hey man, if you don't do this, you're not going to, Carl Jung said that, by the way, but we don't need to go into that.
That's cool. Yeah. Interesting though. While we were talking, sort of brought up in my head, Mr. Torg's music. Like Mr. Torg's he has a lute in there, right?
Yeah.
Did you do all that type of stuff too, where it's like kind of a messy or like a...
Actually, no, that was one of our technical sound designers, Ricky. He's like a really awesome guitarist.
Uh-huh.
He plays electric guitar like really well. He plays all those electric guitar lines, like,
Yeah.
And he played lute for that. We collaborated together on that, and he wrote those lute pieces, and So that's all him. Yeah.
Nice. That is awesome. Not that I wasn't saying messy and
No,
yeah.
but he did that on purpose. Like he did it on purpose. It was supposed to be a certain thing. He even recorded the loot falling on the floor and stuff like that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I also think of when Torg swears in this one, it instead of beeping it out, it does like the loot, fret strum type thing.
Yeah, he did all kinds of stuff like that. And that's a great example of musical sound design, because it's a music element and a sound design element, and it's diegetic because it's in the world, and it creates a memorable thing that you just thought about and said, hey, what about that thing?
Yeah, it just came to me. I was like, how did I not think about that before this moment? But that's awesome. Yeah. How big is your team?
Gosh, I think there's something like 20 people on the audio team.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That would be are there different kind of sub departments?
Yeah, there's like VO, of course, and then there's music, and then there's sound design. And within sound design, there's like technical sound designers, so it kind of branches off like that.
Cool.
Yeah.
For people who might be doing like Dungeons and Dragons night or a game night type of thing, how would do you have any advice for them having like background music or sort of scoring their own, where they're not going to be composers, but just choosing your game night music?
Oh, yeah. My gosh. I mean, just always like going to film soundtracks that you really like, I mean, that's probably an obvious one, because I don't have those game nights too often. But this is a funny thing. I'm sure everyone does this, but on YouTube, not Spotify, on YouTube, if you search playlists, like a lot of those things come up. I know that's really, really simple, but you also learn about artists you didn't know about before. Spotify is the same way, but you learn about artists that are doing stuff like that, and then you look them up, and then that's how you start learning through that web of music that you want for your stuff.
Yeah.
This is what creative directors do when they're trying to figure out a style for, what they're doing. And it's like random, right? It's like throwing the dice. Like, who's out here? What are these names?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you never know what treasure. You might go through a bunch of stuff that doesn't fit, but you'll find that treasure in there.
Yeah, or you could just listen to the Wonderlands soundtrack if you want, if it has any of that in there for you.
I was literally going to say that same thing, because especially for Dungeons and Dragons or any sort of fantasy setting, it's literally written for a fantasy setting. Like it's beautiful for it.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. I would use it in our show, but I can't, where we're doing podcasting. So, yeah. I think that's all I've got for you. I feel like I could go into more and more things and we could dive deeper, but this has been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Thank you. Maybe we could have a part 2 some other time in the future if you want,
Absolutely. Yeah. If you ever want to play Bunkers and Badasses too, you're welcome to join us and
awesome.
Make you a character or whatever, We'll be your friends, Michael.
That's funny.
So, do you want to plug anything outside of Gearbox? You talked about you're in metal bands. Do you guys tour? Can you listen to those anywhere?
Yeah. My electronic project is called Persona Black. My chamber music stuff is called Cition, Cition. And my metal band is called NR, EHNAHRE. Even I have trouble spelling it.
You should have if you could see the focus on his face while he was spelling that.
Yeah. But those are some things that are going on. Yeah. And all that stuff's on Bandcamp, of course.
I'll include links to the Bandcamp in the episode description.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Perfect. Well, great. Do you tour with any of the music? Do you go out?
Yeah. I have a show. Actually, this Friday for my electronic project downtown. I actually live in Phoenix, Arizona now.
Oh, cool.
But I'm kind of here temporarily. I go around, the States and Europe from time to time. Touring is really slowed down just because I'm doing just a lot more production work in my studio. So it's kind of difficult to get out and tour, but I do those from time to time, but they're usually a week, not very long, because I'm getting older now. And it's kind of like, I don't want to be on the road that long anymore.
Absolutely.
I like my kitchen, I like my bed and,
I definitely understand that. Very
Awesome.
neat. Have to keep an eye out. If you ever make it out to Utah, come check it out. Or
Absolutely. Yeah. This has really been a pleasure and great conversation. I appreciate it.
thank you for taking the time and doing this. This is fascinating for me. I hope for listeners as well. Like generally it's been like kind of TTRPG stuff. We do our actual play of playing the bunkers and badasses and story stuff. But I think this is like a cool kind of behind the scenes for the video game industry. And
Totally.
there's a lot of overlap. Like I think I did a poll and it was like most people who play TTRPGs are also playing video games. And
Oh, wow. That's great.
great. Perfect. Thank you again, Josh. Well, hopefully we'll chat again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Riley. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening, badasses. It was so much fun to get to know Michael and hear about how music works in the gaming industry and how it works for Borderlands. And it was just so cool. Like I had theories, but I was not that close on a lot of them. I would love to have Michael back on. I feel like it's like that episode of Community, Remedial Chaos Theory, where they toss a die and they get to explore different realities. And I always feel like that when I have conversations with people, because while we're talking, I'll have like 3 or 4 different questions that come to mind, and I'll only get to ask 1 or 2 of those questions, because then the answer to those questions spawn more questions or lead to different paths of conversation. So of course, there's an alternate universe where we had a completely different chat, and maybe we'll get to explore one of those alternate universes in a future conversation with Michael. I would love to do more chats like this with more people who have worked on the Borderlands series or Tiny Tina's Wonderlands or even Battleborn. I loved that game. So if you worked at Gearbox or work at Gearbox and you can chat, please hit me up. I would love to have more conversations like this. No matter how weird or obscure your job is, if you think it would be boring to talk about, I seriously doubt it would. Just reach out, we can chat. And I'm sure that in the TTRPG space, there's plenty of things that we can learn from your expertise in video games, whatever it is. Just thinking about the modularity of the music that Josh does is fascinating. And when you think about that as even just like story building, it doesn't have to be music, right? Like when you write a story, you can kind of build it with modularity in mind. So there's all sorts of like expertise and things that can inspire us. So reach out to us, ffadventureco@gmail.com, or DM me on any social medias at ffadventureco. You can join our Discord. A link can be found to the invite in the episode description, and you can DM me there. Be sure to stick around until the very end, because Michael sent me a song of his called No Mind. It's beautiful. It's 10 minutes long. I thought about making just a clip of it, and then I was like, well, why not just have the whole thing? Doesn't make a difference here, and then you can hear the whole thing. And if you go to Josh's YouTube, you can hear a lot of different songs, a lot of different styles, which is really awesome. I think one of my favorites was Places of Transformation Part 9. Oof, really cool. Gave me chills. Our intro and outro music is by our very own Kyle, who plays Mercurius. He wrote it just for this podcast, which is amazing. And you can hear the full song on his YouTube at Mecha Mac Music. For listeners, if this is your first time joining us, this isn't what we normally do. We don't normally interview people, but I was really excited to interview somebody who works on the games, who did the music. That was especially exciting for me. Normally, we're a Bunkers and Badasses actual play podcast. It is a tabletop RPG that is inspired by Borderlands and Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. We do our own homebrew story. It's gotten pretty intense at times, but a lot of the times it's very funny. We don't take ourselves very seriously. A lot of people tell us we have a really good Borderlands feel to the podcast, which is super flattering. Give a shout out to all of our ultimate badasses: Ray, Colin, Kelsey, Maxim, Hova, Andre, John, and Jonathan. Thank you so much for your support on Patreon. You really are ultimate badasses, and your support means the world to us. Our next episode isn't delayed. It'll come out March 26th. And then a few days after that, our ultimate badasses that support us on Patreon, they will get access to the first episode of Honey Heist, which is BM'd by Ian, BMing it as Drake Wilson. It is so great, so fun. Ian does an amazing job bunker mastering, really puts me in my place, really humbles me. So that has been an absolute blast. Honey Heist is an adventure in the source book, and it was written by Anthony Birch. It very much has that Anthony Birch Borderlands humor in it. It's wonderful. Such a great time. So you can look forward to that coming out March 28th. You can go support us on Patreon to get access to that episode as well as both parts of Granny Flexington's Badass Farm for Badasses, which was a very spicy 2-part story featuring Mr. Torg. And then you can also follow us on our social medias at FF Adventure Co., pretty much on everything, I think, at this point. And you can also join our Discord. Whether you've listened to the show or not, you are welcome to join, talk Borderlands, or just nerd out with us about other stuff. We have a lot of fun in there. It's a great community, and you are welcome in it, no matter how far or not far into the show you are. Thank you so much. That is it. That is all. And remember, badasses, when you're going through hell, be sure to kill as many minions as you can, loot their bodies, get the best loot and gear you can, and then keep going.
Vault Hunter, I'll watch your back if you watch mine, Vault Hunter. Those bandits better run and hide. You got your 20-sided die. You got a sparkle in your eye. You got your guns. Let's get some.
And now, No Mind by Joshua Carro.